Hi, CSE. Today we're turning our attention to the short story Bile, which is by Christine Lee Zilka. Before we get into reading, we're going to quickly read some background information that'll help us understand the history that really affects one of these characters very deeply and effectively his family as well. So, in June 1950, Communist North Korea invaded South Korea, and US President Truman authorized the use of American ground forces to stop the advance. He felt it was necessary to intervene in order to take a stand against communist aggression. After some early back and forth, the fighting stalled and casualties mounted. American officials worked anxiously with North Koreans to end the war. An agreement was finally reached on July 1953. In all, some 2.5 million soldiers and civilians lost their lives during the war. Christine Lee Zilka explores the repercussions the Korean War has on one American family in the following short story. All right. So we're dealing with a very traumatic war, particularly to the father who was a soldier in this war, and how that is affecting that person's children. The perspective of one is our narrators. So we're going to start reading this. I'm going to be pointing up how, some important features of this text that pertain to our motifs of freedom, but also some additional motifs of pain and history. And the hope is that you can use some of those notes and think about those motifs to come up with a theme statement, which is ultimately going to be what you're asked to do at the end of this text. And it will also help you answer the exit ticket for today, which has to do with one of the characters in this text and his relationship with the father. So let's get reading. When the Korean War ended in 1953, my father became restless. Korea lay in ruins, but there were no more enemy soldiers and no more bombs to flee. My father had become addicted to war. Without battles, he had no sense of urgency, no sense of drama. He had already survived, and like the rest of his country, he tried to pick up his life where he had left off. But he was not used to peace. He could make no sense of math equations as an engineering student. It all seemed trivial. All right. And here we see the problem, essentially, that the father is dealing with, right? Which is that he is sort of stuck in his past, right? He fought in the Korean War, but he can't leave it behind him. And so we're going to see how that develops, not only for him, but how it's affecting his family, many of whom didn't, experience the war as deeply or as directly as he did. He made journeys into the countryside where he'd grown up, hoping to reconnect himself. On one of his outings, he found a trapper gutting a bear. An idea came to him. He asked the hunter for the gallbladder of the bear, and the gallbladder is where the bile is produced. And bile, in case you didn't know, is an acidic substance that basically breaks down fats in your gut. If you've ever thrown up, that you probably know the taste of bile. It's disgusting. It's an awful experience to have to taste it. But as we see here, the father tastes it, right? My father put his tongue to the gallbladder. It tasted like the war. He smiled grimly. He could not fail. He could not turn back because behind him were the Japanese army, the North Korean army, poverty, and abuse. All right. And so he likes this. All right. It looks like, it tasted like the war. He smiled grimly. Right. So he's enjoying this in some way. And we're wondering why might that be? Why is he enjoying that? He could not rest. This bile would be his medicine. He wrapped up the gallbladder and froze it. Whenever he felt he was getting too content, sleeping an hour too much, smiling a second too long, he would hunger for the taste of it, bitter and clinging to his tongue. And here's kind of the critical piece. As children, we learned that Daddy would have died if he had not had the bile. The bile reminded him of the misery and bitterness of suffering. And so this is what I'm seeing here is this is, kind of a crucial moment in the text where we learn that the father needs this to survive, that he needs to be reminded of this suffering that he experienced in the war, and the bile is helping him do that. And so that's an interesting relationship to have between suffering and at the same time, being able to survive and move on with one's life, right? What I now realize is that the bitterness stayed inside him and traveled from his tongue down into his belly, where it now churns. And so I see, so that there's a complication here. Okay, so this is helping him cope with, the sort of boredom of existence and in peacetime, but it's also causing some evil or ill will to sort of brew within him, right, as he consumes it. So now we're going to go away from the father and we're going to talk about the family. Tradition runs strong in our family. We are Korean Americans, a strong line of warriors descended from the Mongols. We are modern Genghis Khans, quick-tempered but passionate, with chronicles of suffering living in our veins. We are nomadic, settling in a country that severed our mother country in half, with a tourniquet of barbed wire swathed in khaki green. All right. And so this is, not only is the past seemingly important to the father, but it's also important to the family, it seems, right? So the father needs to be connected to his history by the Bile. The family, though, just, sort of ethnically, as Korean Americans, they feel strongly connected as well, just because, they're descended from the Mongols, right? Which is this sort of warrior, this ancient warrior culture. Suffering is so much a part of the Korean psyche that we have given it a word, Han. It is a particular suffering, a sense of helplessness against overwhelming odds, a feeling of total abandonment. This word is part of what we call ourselves in our mother country, Hankuk Sharam, Hankuk Nara. Korean people, Korean land. This Han is silent and noble. It is our code and mantra. Okay, so it seems like not only does the father need this connection to suffering, but this is part of who the Korean people identify themselves as, right? That they, in order to feel like Koreans and feel like their true selves, they need to have suffering be a part of that. And so that seems to be playing a role not only in the father's relationship with the Korean conflict, but the Korean aspect of him and the family as well, and just their relationship with suffering. So as you continue to read, keep in mind, ask yourself the questions about how suffering seems to be playing a role in these characters' abilities or inabilities to free themselves. And it could be freedom from a variety of things, freedom from, an overbearing parent, freedom from just the confines of the family, freedom from a physical space, freedom from history. Think about how pain and history sort of play a deep role in that. And that should help you help to start to make sense of the theme for this text. On page 108, so CR 108, you're going to see the question that you're going to answer for your exit ticket today, which is explain how Eugene acts differently from the rest of his family. Why is his father so upset? Support your answer with textual evidence. So this is kind of a two-parter. How he acts differently from the rest of his family. So if you look in these lines, he is doing something that separates him literally from his family. So I need you to point out what that is, and then explain why his father is so upset about that. And it is explained in these lines. And I want you to think of the ideas, how important history and tradition is to him, right? When you answer that question. So this is just to get you thinking of sort of the character development here, and ultimately this thinking about character development will play a large role in the idea of freedom that you'll be talking about for the theme at the end. All right, so thanks for listening and hope you enjoy the story.